If there's something that I'm going to own up to in this video, it's the fact that I have absolutely decimated the Houston Rockets multiple times over the past year. And it could be anything from the way they play basketball on the court or the roster transactions that they have made. Anything from absolutely destroying Clint Capella's stock before trading him to the Atlanta Hawks, and even going further back and making a trade that seemingly made no sense for the Houston Rockets when they swapped Chris Paul for Russell Westbrook. We could go on and on and on into how badly I absolutely destroyed the Houston Rockets for various decisions that they made this season. And guess what? Whenever I make a bad take, there's something I'll always do, and that's own up to it. So here I am, owning up to a bad take I've made that you couldn't really blame me for making in the past, but it seems like I have been wrong. And I'm gonna tell you how I am wrong. And it's gonna absolutely melt your brain. And if it doesn't melt your brain by the end of this video, feel free to unsubscribe, because it did melt my brain. I spent the past 12 hours of the day literally obsessing over the Houston Rockets as a result of what I saw last night. Now guys, before we get to the content, make sure to drop a like just to help this channel on the YouTube algorithm. You could choose whether you want to subscribe at the end of the video. If I do sell you as a content creator, I live stream on Twitch on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays at 9 p.m. Pacific time, and I am giving away multiple copies of NBA 2K21 on Instagram and on Twitter. A link to those are in the description down below. Now that we got all of that out of the way, cue the intro. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? Man, I need to get your opinion on something before we get to this video. You see, there's 3 basketball games being played a day, and I have no idea when to drop my content anymore. So would you guys like it to be dropped at the very end of the day when the games have all been played, or very early in the morning before all the games have been played? Let me know in the comment section down below. Now, if there's one thing I didn't like the Houston Rockets for in years past, it's the fact that they have been all in on Mike D'Antoni's system to an illogical degree. There's been times where they've been so bought into Mike D'Antoni's system that it didn't even make sense, and I was overly critical about this one aspect about the Houston Rockets right when they traded Clint Capella for Robert Covington and went all in on having a small ball starting 5. Now, I understand that it really worked for the Golden State Warriors, but the Golden State Warriors were a little different. They didn't start a 6'5" center like PJ Tucker. They started a 6'8" forward that had the ability to guard all 5 positions on the floor and put Draymond Green next to him, and I'm talking about Andre Iguodala. So when I saw the Houston Rockets attempt to do this as well, I was thinking, okay, Robert Covington's a great two-way player. He's a great 3-and-D player, but he's not Andre Iguodala. He's not as versatile as Andre Iguodala. So I thought it was a little strange when I saw them go all in on this philosophy, because originally the Houston Rockets were known for being a great offensive team that shot way too many threes, and at the same time, a terrible defensive team. But if there's something I've noticed in the first 2 games of the play-in seeding games, it's the fact that the Rockets are a little different. And the first thing I noticed was the Houston Rockets are being completely flexible with Mike D'Antoni's system and their Moneyball philosophy. So if you go back a little bit over a year ago, when the Houston Rockets gave Carmelo Anthony a shot and signed him to the Houston Rockets, the number one biggest problem was the fact that Carmelo Anthony primarily depended on the mid-range jumper. And that was his favorite shot to take, and the Houston Rockets were not okay with that. The Rockets absolutely loathe the mid-range jumper. They believe it's by far the most inefficient shot you can take due to the degree of difficulty it is to make a mid-range jumper and the return the completed jump shot yields, which is just 2 points. For that reason, and that reason alone, the Houston Rockets only like to score 2-point field goals when they are within 3 feet of the basket on either backdoor cut finishes, alley-oop, or strong takes. And the problem with this directly ties into the reason why I was so overly critical with the Russell Westbrook trade, because Russell Westbrook historically has never been that great of a three-point shooter. His best season shooting from three was in his MVP season with the OKC Thunder when he shot 34% from three. In his final season at OKC, he shot 29% from three. And this was the main reason why I felt like the Chris Paul-Russell Westbrook trade was extremely ill-advised for the Houston Rockets, although it was initially their Plan B trade. Plan A was Jimmy Butler, and I have a video on that if you guys want to go check it out. In the past, I've also discussed how Mike D'Antoni was completely unwilling to tinker with his offensive system to suit his best talents. Going all the way back to his time with the New York Knicks and even the Los Angeles Lakers, D'Antoni would do ridiculous things like run Kobe Bryant at point guard for 48 minutes per game, spot Pau Gasol at the three-point line in order for Dwight Howard to consistently run the pick and roll, but it appears as though this past year has allowed for D'Antoni to experiment more with his own system, and that's by not forcing Russell Westbrook to take jumpers that he's not really good at making. Russ's game is very simple and extremely easy to understand. He explodes to the rim with ridiculous speed and burst in transition, and the defender typically realizes that Russ is slashing to the basket and begins to back off on Russ, typically giving up the three-point jumper. At this point, Russ has a choice to make. If the defender is up high enough, then Russ will slash to the rim in order to finish at the rim. If there are multiple defenders at the rim, he will kick it out to an open shooter for a wide open three. However, if he sees the defender backing off on him as he's slashing to the basket, he will pull up for a mid-range jumper. And this is something that the Rockets used to absolutely loathe, but now they appear to support it. The result is not only Russell Westbrook being a successful complementary offensive player to James Harden, but he also is experiencing his greatest shooting percentage of his career with 47% from the field. And that in of itself is reason enough to see the Rockets improve. But there's one more narrative that we have to absolutely demolish, and this is gonna absolutely melt your brain, so hold on tight, guys, because speaking of Mike D'Antoni being absolutely reluctant to tinker with his system, it appears as if he's finally relented on his philosophy once again. After years of being notorious for his system not featuring a successful defense, it appears as if the Houston Rockets finally played remarkable defense against a team that we didn't think they would be able to play good defense on. On paper, if you told me that Giannis Antetokounmpo, who by the way is the defending MVP, and most of you guys, don't lie, most of you guys think that he deserves MVP once again, and I wouldn't be surprised if he does get MVP once again, because they said that the regular season awards are going to be based off of everything that went on before the season restarts. So everything that we're experiencing now won't contribute to whether a player wins Rookie of the Year or not, or MVP or not. So for all you know, Giannis may automatically be this year's MVP once again. And let me know in the comment section down below who you think this year's MVP should be. But I digress. If you told me that Giannis Antetokounmpo was going up against a team that didn't have a center, especially considering the fact that Giannis is like a 7-foot forward, then I would assume that Giannis would absolutely obliterate that team. But here's what surprised me the most. The Milwaukee Bucks played how they were supposed to play. Brook Lopez had a remarkable game where he turned back the clock and forgot the fact that he was a capable three-point shooter. Instead, they featured Lopez down on the block against a 6'5" PJ Tucker. The result was a 50% shooting night and 23 points for Lopez. So what happened? The Bucks played how they were supposed to play. How were the Rockets able to beat the Milwaukee Bucks? Well, you're not gonna believe this. But do you remember that narrative that James Harden was a horrific defender? You're supposed to call him James Harden because there's no D in his game or whatever you want to say. Well, take a look at his first game against the Dallas Mavericks, where James Harden was able to rack up 3 blocks and 3 steals on the defensive end. I know, I thought that was a fluke too. If you thought that was a fluke, I don't blame you because I thought it was a fluke. But take a look at this. When the Dallas Mavericks faced off against the Houston Rockets, Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis combined for 3 for 10 from the field and 4 turnovers, specifically when they were guarded by James Harden. Now initially, I thought that this was unsustainable production. Maybe the Mavericks are just a lesser team than the Rockets. Maybe they aren't as experienced as the Rockets. After all, Kristaps Porzingis got drafted 4 years ago. Luka Doncic got drafted 2 years ago. I was coming up with a whole list of excuses, and none of them brought me to the conclusion that James Harden was a great defender. I just thought that the Mavericks performed so poorly that it made James Harden seem like an elite defender, so I dug a little deeper, and I saw a very, very fascinating statistic. Take a look at this, because you're not going to believe this either. Kristaps Porzingis was 1 for 7 when he was guarded by James Harden in the post. So there might be something here. So if we fast forward to the most recent game the Rockets have played up until the point of this video, then we get to the game that featured arguably the best team in the Eastern Conference, a team that we all automatically assumed was going to get to the NBA Finals against a team that was considered to be in the middle tier of the Western Conference. Come on, guys. You weren't going to put the Rockets over the Lakers. You weren't going to put the Rockets over the Clippers. You weren't going to put the Rockets over the Nuggets. And hell, you probably weren't going to even put the Rockets over the OKC Thunder before the season restarted. But look at what they did. James Harden had 6 steals against the longest and the best team in the East. If you think that's crazy, look at the defense he played on the reigning MVP and the probable MVP this year at the most pivotal point of the game, in the final 2 minutes of the game. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the beef that James Harden has had with Giannis Antetokounmpo, but if there's one narrative that we need to destroy as a result of his efforts, it's the fact that James Harden is an extremely capable on-ball defender and is in the 92nd percentile in post-up defense. Opposing players are 28 for 98, 32% against him in the post this season, and he forces turnovers on 13% of those possessions. And I want you to bear in mind, this is on a night where James Harden wasn't hitting from the offensive end. If you look at his statistics, Harden literally had a 5 for 14 shooting night. 3 for 12 from 3, 24 points. Very not James Harden-like. Heck, if you look at it, 7 assists, 7 rebounds, again, very un-James Harden-like. He typically puts up somewhere in the 40s. Russell Westbrook had 31 points, 6 rebounds, 8 assists, so I guess he kind of picked up the slack, but he also had 5 turnovers of his own. But if you take a look at this, James Harden had 6 steals, Chris Middleton had 6 turnovers. Dante DiVincenzo had 5 turnovers. The Milwaukee Bucks had 22 turnovers. And the entire Houston Rockets had 15 steals and 3 blocks. The result? The Rockets were able to beat the Milwaukee Bucks, despite tying an NBA record for most 3-point attempts in a regulation game and only making 21 out of 61 of their threes. Despite Giannis Antetokounmpo having 36 points, 18 rebounds, and 8 assists for Milwaukee, despite the Houston Rockets being down by 8 with 3 minutes remaining, they were able to come out with a victory. According to ESPN, this is the first time in NBA history that a team lost despite scoring at least 110 points and holding an opponent to less than 40% shooting, and out-rebounding an opponent by at least 25. And despite all of that, the Houston Rockets still won. Now, I don't know whether I'm taking them seriously as an NBA Finals threat yet, because it's only been 2 games, but if they continue this against Portland and they continue this going into the playoffs, one thing that you gotta pay attention to is the fact that they're very, very close to getting the 3rd seed in the West. They are a game behind the Denver Nuggets, and they are 3 games behind the Los Angeles Clippers for 2nd place. So again, I think 2nd place might be a long shot, but I don't think there's a team that's looked as good as the Houston Rockets in these seeding games thus far. The Lakers have been inconsistent, the Clippers have been inconsistent, and the Bucks especially have been inconsistent. Don't get me started with the teams that are on the outside looking into the bubble, like the Pelicans and the Trailblazers. Don't get me started on them. But the Houston Rockets are here to play, and they look extremely legit. And if they get the 3rd seed and the Thunder get the 6th seed, we'll get to watch James Harden and Russell Westbrook go up against their former team in the first round of the NBA playoffs. That sounds fun to me. Let me know what you guys think about the Houston Rockets, man. And if I sold you on my content, make sure you subscribe and turn my notifications on. I'm your boy, Theflightmike. and I'm dropping the mic. Until next time.